The letter arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between bills and junk mail, like it wasn't about to blow my entire life apart. My mother's familiar handwriting jumped out at me immediately, which was impossible since she'd been dead for 3 months. I stood frozen in my kitchen, the morning sunlight streaming through the window as I stared at the envelope. My daily ritual of brewing coffee, the one constant that had kept me sane since Mom's passing, momentarily forgotten. The rich aroma of French roast filled the air, a stark contrast to the coldness spreading through my chest. My name is Erin, and at 53, I thought I had my life figured out, 25 years at the same accounting firm, a recently emptied nest, and a marriage that had weathered most storms. But there I stood, my reading glasses perched on my nose, holding an envelope that shouldn't exist, while my husband Daniel's voice drifted in from the living room as he took another important call about potential job prospects, 6 months after being laid off from his engineering position. "This has to be old mail," I muttered, turning the envelope over, my fingers tracing Mom's distinctive loops and curves. The postmark was from last week. My hands started shaking, the tremor I'd developed after losing my son years ago returning with a vengeance. The sound of Daniel's footsteps made me shove the letter into the pocket of my cardigan, a reflex born from months of avoiding difficult conversations. He appeared in the doorway, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair, a nervous tell I'd picked up on years ago. At 55, Daniel still had the handsome features that had attracted me 3 decades ago, but worry lines had permanently etched themselves around his eyes, deepening with each passing week of unemployment. "Morning," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Any chance that coffee's ready?" "Just about," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady while the letter seemed to burn against my ribs through the pocket. "Any word from that engineering firm?" He poured himself a cup, the slight tremor in his hand not escaping my notice. "They're still reviewing candidates." He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Listen, I need to borrow some money from your personal account. Mom and Dad are having trouble with their mortgage again." The letter seemed to pulse against my side like a second heartbeat. This wasn't the first time we'd had this conversation in recent months. "Daniel, we talked about this. We're already stretched thin covering both our expenses since you lost your job." "It's just temporary," he insisted, that familiar defensive edge creeping into his voice. His jaw tightened the way it always did when he felt cornered. "They helped us out when we first got married, remember? When we couldn't make rent that first year?" I bit back what I really wanted to say. 3 months of temporary support was already straining our savings, but pointing that out would just lead to another argument about family loyalty and obligation, usually ending with me feeling like the villain for suggesting his parents figure out their own finances at 70-something years old. "I'll think about it," I said instead, which was our code for not really, but I didn't want to fight right now. Not with Mom's impossible letter weighing heavy in my pocket, demanding my attention. As soon as Daniel left for another networking meeting at his favorite coffee shop, his third this week with no results, I pulled out the letter with trembling fingers and began to read. "My dearest Erin, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and the timing is critical. I've arranged for this letter to be delivered 3 months after my death because I needed to be certain about something first. Check the loose floorboard in my old studio, the one by the window where you used to sit and watch me paint on Sunday afternoons. What you'll find there will explain everything. But sweetheart, be careful who you trust with this information. Sometimes the people closest to us have the most to gain from our silence. All my love, Mom." I sank into a kitchen chair, the coffee growing cold beside me, my mind racing. Mom's house, my childhood home, was sitting empty while I figured out what to do with it, or at least it was supposed to be empty. But last week I'd driven by and noticed lights on inside. I'd assumed it was just my imagination, or maybe a timer I'd forgotten about when I'd last walked through the echoing rooms filled with Mom's art and memories. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel, having dinner with Mom and Dad. "Don't wait up." I grabbed my keys before I could talk myself out of it. The drive to Mom's house took 20 minutes, each one filled with questions that multiplied like rabbits. What did she hide? Why wait 3 months? And why did her warning about trust make my stomach twist with the same dread I'd felt when I discovered Daniel's secret credit card statements last year? As I pulled up to the curb, my headlights swept across the front of the house and caught movement behind the living room curtains. Someone was definitely inside. I killed the engine and sat there, heart pounding against my ribs, as a familiar car pulled into the driveway. Daniel's car, the same one he was supposed to be taking to his parents' house across town. The porch light clicked on, and through the window I saw my mother-in-law Martha's face, clear as day, inside my mother's house. Confrontation avoided, I didn't confront them that night. Instead, I drove home in a daze, my mother's letter burning a hole in my pocket and questions burning holes in my mind. Each streetlight I passed seemed to illuminate another crack in the foundation of my marriage, casting harsh shadows over memories I'd once held dear. The house was dark and empty when I returned, the silence almost deafening. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching familiar objects, the anniversary clock Daniel had given me 15 years ago, the family photos where our smiles seemed genuine, the throw pillows Martha had insisted would brighten up the place. Everything felt different now, tainted somehow. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the empty space beside me growing colder as the hours passed. What were they doing in Mom's house? What secret was hidden beneath that floorboard? And how much of my life was built on lies I'd been too trusting, or too afraid, to see? The next morning, I got ready for work like everything was normal, following the routine I'd perfected over 2 decades. I applied my makeup with careful precision, covering the dark circles that betrayed my sleepless night. I chose my navy pantsuit, the one that made me feel powerful on days when I needed armor. I even left Daniel's coffee mug by the pot, though I knew he had already left, avoiding me as skillfully as I was avoiding confrontation. Like I hadn't caught my husband and his mother sneaking around my dead mother's house. The promotion announcement came during the morning meeting. 25 faces turned toward me as my boss beamed from the head of the conference table. I'm pleased to announce that after 25 years of dedicated service, Erin will be taking over as head of financial operations, she announced, her voice carrying across the polished wood table. No one deserves this more. Under different circumstances, this would have been the highlight of my year, hell, my decade. The culmination of years of hard work, late nights, and sacrifices. Now it felt like one more match being tossed onto an already smoldering pile of kindling, ready to ignite my carefully constructed life. My colleagues applauded. Someone brought out a cake. I smiled and thanked everyone, playing my part in this celebration while my thoughts remained trapped in the image of Martha's face in my mother's window. Daniel was waiting at home when I got back, sprawled on the couch with his laptop. His casual posture couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders or the way his eyes darted to mine and quickly away again. "How was work?" he asked, not looking up from the screen, fingers tapping a nervous rhythm on the keyboard. I set my purse down carefully, watching his reaction. "I got the promotion." His fingers stopped typing. A moment of stillness passed between us, heavy with all the things we weren't saying. "Oh." Just that one syllable, heavy with something that wasn't quite congratulations. He finally met my eyes, his expression unreadable. "Have you told Mom and Dad yet?" The question landed like a slap. "Why would I tell your parents before telling you?" He shrugged, closing his laptop. "They're coming over for dinner tonight. I thought we could celebrate as a family." My stomach clenched, a physical reaction to the mention of Martha and Richard after what I'd seen last night. "You invited them without asking me? After I worked a full day?" "Come on, Erin," he sighed, that familiar note of disappointment creeping into his voice. "They're just trying to be supportive. Dad picked up steaks from that butcher you like." 2 hours later, I was setting the table while Martha hovered in my kitchen, rearranging my spice rack to make more sense. Every time I looked at her perfectly coiffed silver hair and designer blouse, that she certainly couldn't afford on Richard's pension, I remembered her silhouette in my mother's window. My fingers tightened around the silverware, imagining the satisfaction of confronting her right here, between the salt and pepper shakers she was currently repositioning. "These should be together, dear," she said, completely oblivious to my murderous thoughts. "It's more efficient." Richard emerged from our guest bathroom, his imposing figure commanding attention as he always did. At 75, he still carried himself with the authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "Noah tells us you got a promotion," Richard said from his seat at the head of my table, a spot he always claimed without asking. His tone suggested he was announcing I'd contracted a mild case of the flu. "That's quite a responsibility. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of pressure?" I placed down the last fork with perhaps more force than necessary, the clink against the table punctuating my irritation. "I've been doing most of the work already for years. The title just makes it official." Martha turned from the spice rack, wiping her hands on a dish towel as if she'd completed some essential task. "But surely, with Daniel between positions right now, you'll want to focus more on supporting him. A wife's primary duty is to her husband, after all." Her smile never reached her eyes. "Especially at your age, you should be thinking about scaling back, not taking on more stress." I caught Daniel's slight wince. He opened his mouth, probably to change the subject, but I was done playing nice. 25 years of swallowing my responses had left a bitter taste, and suddenly I couldn't stomach it anymore. "Actually," I said, setting down the water pitcher with deliberate care, "my primary duty is to my career, which is currently supporting this entire household." Dinner confrontation, the room went silent. The expensive grandfather clock in the corner, a wedding gift from Martha and Richard, ticked loudly in the sudden stillness. Richard's face darkened, his jaw clenching in that same way Daniel's did when confronted. Martha pressed her hand to her chest like I'd physically struck her, a gesture so theatrical I almost expected her to call for smelling salts. "Aaron," Daniel warned quietly, his eyes pleading. "No, let's talk about it," I continued, surprising myself with how steady my voice was. Years of presenting financial projections to skeptical executives had taught me something after all. "Let's talk about how I'm paying our mortgage, our bills, and somehow still finding money to help with your parents' expenses. Let's talk about why you were at my mother's house last night when you told me you were having dinner with them." The color drained from Daniel's face. Martha's hand dropped from her chest, and her expression shifted from shocked to calculated in an instant, like a mask being adjusted. "We were simply checking on the property," she said smoothly, "as family. We feel responsible for helping maintain it while you're dealing with your grief." I'd known Martha for 30 years, watched her manipulate situations with the precision of a surgeon, but I'd never been the direct target before. It was almost impressive. "That's interesting," I replied, refilling my wine glass with deliberate slowness, considering I never gave anyone permission to enter the house. "Daniel has a key," Richard cut in, his tone suggesting this simple fact ended all discussion. "And as your husband," Martha started. "As my husband, he has no legal right to that property," I interrupted, my voice growing sharper. "It's not in his name. It was left specifically to me." Daniel stood up suddenly, his napkin falling to the floor. "Can we discuss this later, in private?" His eyes darted between his parents and me, panic written across his features. "Why?" I challenged, setting down my glass with more force than intended. "So you can come up with better excuses?" "You're being hysterical," Martha said, her voice dripping with concern that didn't reach her eyes. "This is exactly why we worry about you taking on too much responsibility. The stress is clearly affecting your judgment." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that seemed to startle everyone, including myself. 30 years of marriage, and they still thought they could gaslight me like I was a naive 20-something again. My judgment is just fine. In fact, it's never been clearer. I pulled my mother's letter from my pocket and placed it on the table. The cream-colored envelope sat between us like a grenade with the pin removed. Would anyone like to explain why my dead mother felt the need to warn me about trusting the people closest to me? The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel stared at the letter like it was a snake about to strike, but it was Martha's reaction that confirmed my suspicions. The flash of recognition in her eyes before she could hide it, the slight stiffening of her shoulders beneath her cashmere sweater. What exactly did you find in my mother's studio? I asked quietly, looking directly at Martha. And how long have you been looking for it? Bank statement discovery. After the disastrous dinner, I spent hours combing through our bank statements. The house was silent, Daniel having left with his parents after a tense standoff where no one had actually answered my questions. The kitchen still smelled of the steaks no one had eaten, the dishes stacked in the sink like archaeological evidence of a civilization's collapse. The truth revealed itself in a series of small withdrawals, each one a paper cut to my trust in Daniel. He'd been moving money to his parents' account for months, thousands of dollars hidden behind vague descriptions like household expenses and maintenance fees. No wonder our savings had been dwindling despite my careful budgeting. Sleep eluded me again. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, surrounded by bank statements and betrayal, watching the sun rise through the window while my 25-year marriage crumbled like sand between my fingers. The next morning, I found Daniel in the kitchen making coffee like it was any other day. The sight of him standing there, so casual in his faded t-shirt and sweatpants, coffee scoop in hand, made my blood boil. How dare he pretend everything was normal? Want to explain these transfers? I slid the printed statements across the counter, my voice morning rough but firm. He glanced at them, then away, shoulders slumping slightly. I was going to tell you. When? I asked, crossing my arms to stop myself from shaking. After you'd emptied our savings? Or when I couldn't cover the mortgage next month? He sighed, rubbing his face with both hands, suddenly looking every day of his 55 years. They needed help with their mortgage, he said, his voice taking on that defensive tone I'd grown to hate. Dad's pension isn't covering everything since the market crashed. Their investments took a hit. So you decided to secretly drain our account instead of having an adult conversation about it? My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. We've been married for 25 years, Daniel. 25 years. Because I knew you'd react like this. He slammed his coffee mug down, brown liquid sloshing over the rim onto the counter we'd picked out together during our kitchen renovation 5 years ago. You don't understand what it's like having parents who actually need you. Your mom left you that house, plus whatever she hid in that studio. His words hit me like a physical blow. My mother had battled cancer for 2 years before finally succumbing 3 months ago. I'd been there through every treatment, every setback, every moment of hope and despair while Daniel had managed to be too busy for most hospital visits. What exactly did your mother find there? I cut in, watching his face carefully, suddenly alert to the subtext beneath his words. He froze for a split second, long enough to confirm he knew something. Nothing. We were just cleaning. Cleaning what? The floorboards? The moment I said it, his eyes widened slightly. That's it, isn't it? You found my mom's letter. Somehow you knew about the loose floorboard. Harper, he stopped himself, realizing his mistake. Aaron, did you find what she hid there? Is that why you've all been sneaking around my house? Instead of answering, he pulled out his phone. I watched in disbelief as he typed out a message, his fingers moving rapidly across the screen. Are you texting your mother right now? I asked, incredulity momentarily overriding anger. She needs to be part of this conversation. His tone suggested this was perfectly reasonable. I grabbed my car keys from the hook by the door. No, she really doesn't. Where are you going? To my mother's house. I corrected myself immediately. And if I find your parents there again? They have nowhere else to go. The words exploded out of him, echoing in our kitchen. The bank foreclosed on their house 2 months ago. They've been staying at Mom's place. Shocking revelation, because it's my mother's house, I corrected coldly, my fingers tightening around the keys until the metal bit into my palm. And what exactly is Mom's place? He ran his hands through his hair, that nervous gesture I'd once found endearing. Now it just looked manipulative, a calculated move to appear vulnerable. Martha says she and your mother had an arrangement, something about shared ownership, or... I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears, bouncing off the granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that had once symbolized our success. My mother would never agree to that. She didn't even like Martha. That's not true. They were close. His voice rose defensively. Mom has proof. What proof? But he was already texting again, probably warning them I was coming. I left him standing there, his excuses following me out the door like desperate puppies. The spring morning was deceptively beautiful, cherry blossoms nodding in the gentle breeze, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. The drive to my mother's house felt different this time. Every memory of the past few months shifted like puzzle pieces rearranging themselves into a new, disturbing picture. Noah's late-night networking meetings. The way Martha had pushed to help organize Mom's belongings after the funeral, insisting I was too overcome with grief to handle it properly. The mysterious disappearance of some of Mom's paintings, just being cleaned and reframed, Martha had assured me. When I pulled up to the house, Martha was waiting on the porch like she owned the place. Maybe, in her mind, she did. Her silver hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour, her casual outfit probably costing more than my entire wardrobe. "Erin, dear," she called out, all sugary concern as I slammed my car door. "Daniel said you were upset. Let's talk about this rationally." I walked past her into the house, my house, the scent of Mom's favorite lavender candles noticeably absent. Instead, Martha's cloying perfume hung in the air. I headed straight for the studio, my heart pounding with each step on the familiar hardwood floors. The room still smelled like oil paints and turpentine, but something was off. The furniture had been rearranged, and Mom's easel was missing. Her work table had been cleared of the organized chaos she'd always maintained, replaced with Martha's idea of order, everything in neat, soulless rows. I knelt by the window, running my fingers along the floorboards. The loose one was gone, replaced with a new board that didn't quite match the others in color or texture. "We had to fix it," Martha said from the doorway, her voice honey-sweet. "It was a safety hazard. But don't worry, we kept everything we found. Your mother's letter mentioned some important documents." She smiled, adjusting the sleeve of her blouse with manicured fingers that had never known a day of hard work. I stood up slowly, fury burning through my veins like acid. "What documents?" "The deed to the house, of course. And the agreement she and I made about shared ownership." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You understand now why we had to take matters into our own hands. We're family, after all." Hotel night revelation. I spent that night in a hotel, ignoring Daniel's calls and trying to make sense of Martha's claims. The room was sterile and impersonal, but somehow more comforting than my own home had become. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone as messages piled up, 8 from Daniel, 3 from my office, and 1 from a number I didn't recognize. The next morning, I did something I should have done weeks ago. I called my mother's lawyer, Thomas. The phone rang 3 times before his familiar gravelly voice answered. "I was wondering when you'd contact me," he said, his voice grave. "I've been trying to reach you about some concerning activity with your mother's accounts." My stomach dropped, the coffee I'd just swallowed threatening to make a reappearance. "What kind of activity?" Someone's been attempting to access her safety deposit box using an old power of attorney document. The bank flagged it as suspicious since the document appeared to be dated after your mother's death. I gripped my phone tighter, pacing the small hotel room. Let me guess, Martha Prescott. You know about this, he said. It wasn't a question. I'm learning more every day. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. Thomas, I need to know, did my mother ever make any agreement about shared ownership of the house with Martha? Absolutely not. His voice sharpened, the professional veneer giving way to genuine concern. In fact, your mother specifically amended her will 3 months before her death to ensure the house would be solely yours. She was quite insistent about keeping the Prescotts away from her property. I closed my eyes, remembering Mom's letter. Sometimes the people closest to us have the most to gain from our silence. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, forming a picture so ugly I could barely bring myself to look at it. Aaron, Thomas continued, his voice gentler now, there's something else. Your mother left specific instructions about the contents of her studio. She said you'd know where to look. The floorboards have been replaced, I said, sinking onto the bed. Whatever was there is gone. Then we have a serious problem. Those documents weren't just about the house. Before he could explain further, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel, coming to the hotel. We need to talk. Found something you should see. My heart leapt despite everything, a treacherous part of me still hoping for an explanation that could salvage something from the wreckage of trust. I have to go, I told Thomas, but I need copies of everything, the will, the amendments, all of it. I'll send them right over. And Aaron, be careful, he added, his usually steady voice wavering slightly. Your mother was worried about. About what? About how far certain people would go to protect their interests. The warning hung in the air between us like smoke, impossible to grasp yet impossible to ignore. Daniel's arrival. 20 minutes later, Daniel knocked on my hotel room door. When I opened it, he looked terrible, like he hadn't slept all night. Deep lines bracketed his mouth, and his eyes were bloodshot behind his glasses. For a moment, I felt that old instinct to comfort him, to smooth his rumpled shirt and make everything better. I tamped it down ruthlessly. Before you say anything, he started, pulling out a folder from his messenger bag. You need to see these. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, of my mother and Martha together, shopping, having lunch, looking like close friends. The most recent ones were dated just weeks before Mom died. See? Daniel's voice was almost pleading, his finger tapping one of the photos where the two women appeared to be laughing together at an outdoor cafe. They were friends. Mom wasn't lying about that. I picked up one photo, studying it carefully. The date stamp read just 2 weeks before Mom's death, when she had been so weak she could barely leave the house. These are fake. What? No. He shook his head emphatically. Mom found them in Jean's desk. Mom broke her wrist 6 months before she died. She wore a brace for weeks. I held up the supposedly recent photo. No brace. And her hair was different by then, shorter, after the chemo. These are old photos, probably from years ago, digitally dated to look recent. Daniel's face fell, the hope draining away like water down a sink. But Mom said, "Your mother is trying to steal my house, Daniel." My voice cracked with the weight of the realization. She forged documents, broke in, and took whatever my mom left in that studio, and you've been helping her. They needed somewhere to live, he said, running both hands through his hair. The foreclosure. Stop. I held up my hand, unable to bear any more excuses. Just stop lying. I talked to Thomas. Mom specifically changed her will to keep your family away from the house. She knew something like this would happen. Aaron, please. His voice broke, tears welling in his eyes. They're still my parents. We can figure something out. Maybe they could rent a room, just until there is no we anymore. The words came out with surprising steadiness, given how my world was collapsing around me. You chose your side the moment you started emptying our accounts behind my back. His expression hardened, the vulnerability replaced by something colder. Fine, then you should know Mom found documents in the studio, legal papers that prove she has a claim to the house. If you force this, it'll get ugly. It's already ugly. I opened the door, no longer able to look at the stranger wearing my husband's face. Tell your mother she has 24 hours to get out of my house before I file charges for breaking and entering, theft, and fraud. You wouldn't. The disbelief in his voice might have been comical under different circumstances. I met his eyes one last time. Try me. Legal discovery. After he left, I checked my email. Thomas had sent the old documents along with a cryptic message. Found something interesting in your mother's old financial records. Call me ASAP. My phone buzzed again, another text from Daniel. Mom says to remember what happened to the paintings. I froze, suddenly understanding with crystal clarity. The missing artwork. The forged documents. The desperate attempts to access Mom's safety deposit box. This wasn't just about the house. This was about what my mother had hidden and what the Prescotts would do to get it. I called Thomas immediately, and 30 minutes later I was walking into his office, the weight of revelation making each step heavier than the last. Thomas's office was a maze of filing cabinets and leather-bound books, a testament to his 40 years of legal practice. But what caught my attention was the painting on his wall, one of my mother's landscapes that had gone missing from her studio. A sunset over the lake where we'd spent summers when I was a child. Martha sold it to me last week, he said, following my gaze. His white hair and lined face seemed to have aged years since I'd last seen him at the funeral. Said she was handling the estate sale. I knew something wasn't right. I sank into the chair across from his desk, the leather cool against my back. What did you find in the financial records? He pulled out a thick folder, his arthritis-gnarled fingers working with practiced efficiency. Your mother was investigating Richard Prescott's old engineering firm, specifically their involvement in a series of construction projects that collapsed 10 years ago. 3 people died. My hands started shaking. What does that have to do with my mother? She was an artist, yes, but she also did forensic accounting work before retiring, as you know, Thomas said, his voice steady but grim. She found evidence of fraudulent inspections, falsified safety reports, all signed off by Richard. The pieces started falling into place, a terrible puzzle assembling itself before my eyes. That's what she hid in the studio, proof of their corruption. And now they're desperate to find it. Thomas leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. The statute of limitations on criminal charges has expired, but civil suits, those could still bankrupt them. My phone buzzed. Daniel again, we need to talk. Found a solution. Everyone can live with. They're trying to make a deal, I said, showing Thomas the message. Thomas's expression darkened. Be careful. People who've covered up deaths once won't hesitate to do it again. I stood up, smoothing my skirt with trembling hands. I need copies of everything. Already done. He handed me a USB drive. But Aaron, there's more. Your mother's safety deposit box, it doesn't contain documents. It contains a key to a storage unit. Before I could respond, another text came through, this time from an unknown number. Your mother should have minded her own business. Like mother, like daughter. I showed Thomas the message. His face went pale, the wrinkles around his mouth deepening into crevices. Your mother's death wasn't investigated thoroughly, he said quietly. The medical examiner ruled it natural causes, but... But what? My voice came out as barely more than a whisper. She left me a letter too. Said if anything happened to her, I should look closer at her medication. The world tilted sideways. I gripped the edge of his desk, the polished wood smooth beneath my fingers, as memories flashed through my mind. Martha helping during Mom's final weeks, organizing her pills, bringing her food, insisting on being there when the hospice nurse visited. Are you saying? I couldn't finish the sentence, the horror of it sticking in my throat like a bone. Thomas merely nodded, his eyes full of sorrow. My phone rang. Daniel again. This time I answered. Come home, he said without preamble. Mom has a proposition. We can fix this. Fix what? My voice sounded strange to my own ears, distant and hollow. The fraud? The theft? Or my mother's murder? There was a long pause, only the sound of breathing on the line. What are you talking about? Ask your parents about the construction projects, I said, my grip on the phone so tight my knuckles turned white. Ask them what really happened to my mother. Aaron, you're not thinking clearly. His voice took on that patronizing tone that had always made my teeth clench. Just come home. We can work this out as a family. Family? I laughed, the sound bordering on hysteria. Your family killed my mother. That's a serious accusation, a new voice said, Martha's, listening in. Be very careful about what you say next, dear. Grief can make people imagine terrible things. I thought about Mom's letter, her warning about trust, her final weeks of illness that had seemed to progress so rapidly. 24 hours, I said, my voice steadier now despite the tremor in my hands. Get out of my house and return everything you took, or I'm going to the police with everything I have. You have nothing, Martha snapped, dropping her sweet facade like a discarded coat. And if you're smart, you'll keep it that way. Some accidents are easier to arrange than others. The line went dead. I looked at Thomas, my hands still shaking but my mind suddenly clear, as if a fog had lifted. I need a forensic team at the house, I said, and I need to access that storage unit before they do. They'll be watching you. Thomas warned. Let them. I pulled out my mother's letter, reading it again. Sometimes the people closest to us have the most to gain from our silence. I'm done being quiet. As I left his office, my phone buzzed one last time. Daniel, don't make me choose between you and my family. I typed back 4 words, you already did. Goodbye. Then I turned off my phone and headed for the storage facility. It was time to finish what my mother started. Final confrontation, the storage unit key felt heavy in my pocket, like it was made of lead instead of brass. As I pulled up to my mother's house, something was wrong. The front door stood slightly open, and Daniel's car wasn't the only one in the driveway. Richard's truck loomed like a threat, its massive chrome grille catching the afternoon sunlight. I called Thomas. They're here. The police are on their way. Don't go inside. But through the window, I could see them ransacking Mom's studio. Martha was pulling books from shelves while Richard attacked the walls with a hammer, looking for hidden compartments. And Daniel. Daniel was going through Mom's remaining paintings with a box cutter, systematically slicing through canvas after canvas. The sight of my mother's work being destroyed ignited something primal in me. I was through the door before I could stop myself, rage propelling me forward. Get away from those. My voice echoed through the house. They all froze. Daniel dropped the box cutter, looking guilty, but Richard and Martha's expressions were different, calculated, dangerous. Aaron, Martha said smoothly, brushing dust from her expensive sweater, we were just doing some renovations. By destroying my mother's art? My voice shook with fury. Or are you looking for more evidence of Richard's negligence? How many people died because of those falsified reports? Richard stepped forward, his imposing figure suddenly menacing in the afternoon light that streamed through the windows. You don't know what you're talking about. 3 families lost people they loved because you cut corners, I said, standing my ground despite the fear curling in my stomach. And when my mother figured it out. She should have kept her mouth shut, Martha snapped, her designer facade cracking to reveal the harshness beneath, just like you should. Daniel moved between us, his hands raised placatingly. Everyone needs to calm down. Aaron, we can work this out. Just tell us what's in the storage unit. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. You followed me to Thomas's office. We had to, he said, almost pleading. You're not thinking clearly. This could ruin everyone's lives. Your father already ruined lives, I shot back, my voice rising. And your mother. I turned to Martha, rage burning through my fear. What did you put in her medication? How long did you plan it? Careful, dear, Martha's voice turned ice cold, all pretense of warmth gone. Accusations like that could be dangerous. Grief can make people unstable. Accidents happen. Is that what happened to my mother? An accident? Richard stepped closer, his height allowing him to loom over me. Where's the storage unit key? The police are on their way, I bluffed, taking a step back. No, they're not, Daniel said quietly. I saw you make that call. You're bluffing. The walls seemed to close in. I backed toward the door, but Richard was faster. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. The key, he demanded. Now. Let her go, Daniel said, but his voice was weak, uncertain. Stay out of this, Richard snapped at his son. You've done enough damage letting her run wild like this. I twisted free, but Martha was behind me, blocking the exit. Think about Daniel, she said. Do you really want to destroy his family? Just give us the key and this can all go away. Like my mother went away? I asked, watching her face closely. Something shifted in her eyes, not guilt, but satisfaction. She made her choice, just like you're making yours. I reached into my pocket, felt the key's metal edges. One move could end this. Give them what they wanted. Walk away. Pretend none of this happened. Save what was left of my safety, my life. But I saw my mother's paintings in shreds on the floor, saw the hammer holes in her studio walls, remembered her final weeks growing weaker while Martha helped with her medication. I thought about the 3 families who had lost loved ones because of Richard's greed. I pulled out my phone instead of the key. What are you doing? Richard demanded, his voice sharp with panic. Sending evidence to every news outlet in the state, I said, my fingers flying over the screen. Mom's findings. Thomas's investigation. Proof of your fraud. Richard lunged. The phone went flying. I heard it crack against the wall as his hands closed around my throat. Dad, stop. Daniel's shout seemed far away through the roaring in my ears. Get the key. Richard growled, his fingers tightening. Martha's hands were in my pockets. As I struggled to breathe, she pulled out the key with a triumphant cry. Richard released me. I collapsed, gasping, as they rushed out. The sound of car engines starting filled the air. Daniel stood frozen, looking between me and the door. Help me, I wheezed, my throat burning. He took a step back, his face a mask of conflict. I'm sorry, he whispered. Then he was gone too, leaving me alone in my mother's ruined studio, surrounded by the wreckage of everything I'd believed in. My phone lay shattered nearby, the evidence unsent. And somewhere across town, they were heading for a storage unit that contained nothing but empty boxes. Because my mother had taught me well, sometimes the best revenge is letting your enemies think they've won. The real evidence was somewhere else entirely, and now I knew exactly what I had to do with it. The gallery reveal, the storage unit was empty, just as I'd planned. But I wasn't at the police station, where they'd expect me to go next. Instead, I stood in the gallery where my mother had held her last show, watching through the windows as Daniel's car pulled up outside. They'd figure it out soon enough, Mom's real evidence wasn't in a storage unit or hidden under floorboards. It was hanging right here, hidden in plain sight. I straightened my jacket and touched my bruised throat gently. The pain was a reminder of what was at stake. Martha burst through the door first, her face flushed with rage, silver hair disheveled for once. "Where is it?" she demanded, eyes darting around the gallery's white walls. "Look around," I said, gesturing to the paintings on the walls with a calmness I didn't entirely feel. Mom always said art reveals truth if you know how to look. Richard stormed in behind her, followed by Daniel. "Stop playing games," Richard growled, his earlier composure completely abandoned. "Not playing," I replied, walking to the largest painting, the one Mom had finished just before she died. It hung prominently on the far wall, illuminated by carefully positioned gallery lights. Did you ever wonder why she insisted this piece stay in the gallery? Why she made sure it was properly insured? They stared at the canvas, a seemingly abstract swirl of colors and shapes. But hidden within the chaos were documents, photographs, numbers. Mom had turned Richard's fraud into art, embedding the evidence in layers of paint and texture. Only someone who knew what to look for would see it: the building specifications, the falsified safety reports, the dates of inspections that never happened. "That's nothing but colors," Martha scoffed, but her voice shook. "You can't prove anything with this." "The insurance company's forensic team disagrees," I said, a small smile playing at my lips. "They've already documented everything." "And the original documents," I continued, watching their faces carefully, "are currently being reviewed by the district attorney." Richard lunged for the painting. I stepped between them. "Touch it and the alarm triggers. Police response time is 3 minutes. "You're bluffing," Daniel said, "like you were bluffing about the police before." "Check your phone," I suggested, nodding toward the device in his hand. "The story is already breaking." They all pulled out their phones, and I watched their faces as they saw the headlines: "Fatal construction collapse, new evidence reveals cover-up." Thomas had come through, just as I knew he would. "You've destroyed this family," Martha hissed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her palms. "No," I replied, the weight of truth straightening my spine. "You did that when you killed my mother." "You can't prove that," she said, but her hands were shaking, betraying her certainty. "Actually, I can. Mom documented her symptoms, had her blood tested privately. The results were part of what she hid in the studio until you found them." I watched understanding dawn on her face. "That's why you rushed to get rid of her paintings, wasn't it? Afraid she'd hidden more evidence in her art." Richard grabbed Martha's arm. "We need to go. Now." "Running won't help," I said. "The police have already shut down the airport and train stations." Richard spun toward me, his control finally snapping. "You think you're so clever. Your mother thought the same thing, right up until the end." Daniel stepped between us. "Dad, stop." "Move," Richard growled, looking every bit the bully he'd always been beneath his respectable veneer. "No." Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. "I've helped cover up enough." Martha's face contorted with fury. "After everything we've done for you." "You killed her mother," Daniel said, the words cutting through the air like glass. "You've been bleeding us dry for months, and now I find out about the construction deaths. When does it end?" "It ends now," I said, as police sirens filled the air. Through the gallery windows, I could see officers taking position. "The gallery is surrounded." "Has been since he walked in," I said, nodding toward Richard. Richard made one last grab for the painting. Daniel caught his arm, wrestling him back as officers flooded through the doors. I watched them lead Richard and Martha away in handcuffs, their rights being read over Martha's protests and Richard's threats. Daniel stood apart, looking lost, the middle-aged son of criminals, the husband who had chosen poorly. He approached me hesitantly. "I didn't know," he said quietly, about your mom, about any of it. I should have. But you didn't want to know, I finished. That's why we're done. Aaron. His voice cracked on my name. The divorce papers are with my lawyer, I said, turning away from his stricken face. Along with evidence of the money you took from our accounts. Some things can't be fixed. 25 years of marriage ended in a week of revelations. As the gallery cleared out, I stood alone before my mother's final painting. Up close, you could see the truth hidden in every brushstroke, not just the evidence of Richard's crimes, but a message from Mom herself worked into the pattern. The truth always comes to light. She'd known they'd kill her for discovering their secret, but she'd made sure the truth wouldn't die with her. She'd turned it into art, knowing I'd understand eventually. I touched the canvas gently. I get it now, Mom, I whispered to the silent gallery. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies, it's about making sure they can't destroy the truth. Behind me, the gallery doors closed on the sound of sirens, marking the end of one story and the beginning of another. Epilogue. 6 months after the arrests, I stood in my mother's studio, finally ready to repair the damage. The holes in the walls had been patched, the broken floorboards replaced. But I'd left her paintings untouched, their torn edges a reminder of how quickly things can unravel. The trial was set for spring. Richard and Martha had pleaded not guilty, but the evidence Mom had woven into her art was damning. 3 families from the construction collapse had joined the civil suit, their years of silence finally broken. I picked up a torn canvas, running my fingers along its jagged edge. The damage couldn't be undone, but perhaps something new could emerge from it. The doorbell rang. Daniel stood on the porch, looking older somehow. The past 6 months had etched new lines around his mouth, added more gray to his temples. The divorce papers are signed, he said, holding out an envelope. You could have mailed them. I wanted to return this, he replied, holding out a small key, the one to Mom's house. And to tell you I'm testifying against them. The DA offered a deal. I took the key without touching his hand, the metal cool against my palm. Why now? I asked, genuinely curious. Because your mother deserved better. You deserved better. He shifted uncomfortably on the porch, the spring breeze ruffling his hair. They found more evidence in Dad's old files, other projects, other cover-ups. How many? Too many. He turned to leave, then stopped. I'm sorry, I wasn't stronger. I watched him walk away for the last time, feeling nothing but a quiet certainty that I'd made the right choice. The man I had married wouldn't have needed to find strength, he would have stood by my side from the beginning. Back in the studio, I noticed something odd about the newly patched wall, a slight discoloration near the baseboard. Kneeling down, I pressed against it. A small panel popped open. Inside was a leather-bound journal and another letter in Mom's handwriting. My dearest Aaron, if you're reading this, you've already learned the hard truth about strength, that it often comes from standing alone. The journal contains everything I couldn't put into my paintings, but more importantly, it contains the story of how I learned to stand up for myself. You'll find the deed to the gallery in here too. I bought it years ago under a different name. It's yours now. The Prescotts never knew about it. Some secrets are meant to protect, not harm. Remember, art isn't just about beauty. Sometimes it's about showing the world what others try to hide. All my love, Mom. I opened the journal, recognizing the names of other construction projects, other families who'd lost loved ones. Mom hadn't just documented Richard's crimes, she'd created a record of every voice that had been silenced. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas, 3 more families have come forward. You were right about the pattern. I looked around the studio, at the torn paintings, the patched walls, the hidden panel that had protected truth when everything else fell apart. Then I pulled out my laptop and started typing. My name is Aaron Calloway, and this is a story about justice. Not the kind that comes from revenge, but the kind that comes from refusing to stay silent. The words flowed easily now, telling not just my story or my mother's, but all the stories that had been buried under years of manipulation and fear. The manuscript would take months to complete, but I had time. The truth had waited this long, it deserved to be told right. Later that evening, I hung one of Mom's restored paintings in the gallery, not the one that had exposed Richard's crimes, but a smaller piece I'd never fully understood before. It showed a woman standing alone in a storm, her face turned toward the light breaking through clouds. The plaque beneath it read, "Strength by Jean Calloway." As I locked up the gallery, my phone buzzed again, an unknown number. "You're just like your mother. This isn't over." I smiled, thinking of the journal in my bag, the manuscript on my laptop, and all the stories yet to be told. "No," I whispered to the empty gallery, "it's just beginning." Because Mom was right, some secrets protect, others destroy. The trick is knowing which ones to keep and which ones need to be transformed into art for the whole world to see. I turned off the lights, leaving the painting of the woman in the storm glowing softly in the darkness, her face still turned toward the breaking light. I never expected betrayal to smell like lavender. That's what hit me first when I walked into our bedroom that evening, the overwhelming scent of my mother-in-law's signature perfume lingering in a space where it had no business being. The lavender fragrance took me back 27 years, to when Thomas and I first started dating. Virginia had worn the same scent then, dabbing it on her wrists at every family dinner. Over the years, my sense of smell had dulled to it, just as I'd grown accustomed to her constant presence in our marriage. But tonight it felt invasive, a violation in the sanctuary of our bedroom. My name is Diane Howard, and until I found that note on my pillow, I thought I had finally reached a turning point in my life. At 53, with our son finally settled in college and my recent promotion to vice president, I believed I could at last prioritize my career without guilt. It's funny how a single piece of paper can shatter the illusion of control that took me decades to build. The note itself was simple, written in Virginia's unmistakable cursive, "Some wives deserve what's coming to them. V." I stood there holding the paper while my hands started to shake, the gold wedding band I'd worn for 27 years suddenly feeling heavy on my finger. The house was quiet except for the distant sound of Thomas in the shower, too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you notice things like how the throw pillows on our bed were slightly misaligned, or how my bedside drawer wasn't fully closed. "Hey honey," Thomas called out from the bathroom, his voice echoing against the tile. "Didn't expect you home so early. How did the board meeting go? Did they announce the promotion?" I quickly folded the note and slipped it into the pocket of my blouse, my heart racing. The excitement of my promotion, the culmination of 25 years of hard work, suddenly felt hollow. "It went fine," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady as I crossed to the window, needing air. "Thomas, has your mother been here today?" The water shut off. There was a pause, just a beat too long. The same pause I'd learned to recognize over the years when Thomas was deciding how much truth to tell. "Mom?" "No, why would she be?" I walked to my bedside drawer and pulled it open. My leather-bound planner was slightly out of place, and when I flipped through it, I could see faint fingerprints on pages detailing my upcoming business trips and meetings. The trip to Singapore that James had just asked me to take, the one that would cement my new position, it was all there, and someone had been looking through it. Thomas emerged from the bathroom, a towel around his waist, water dripping from his salt and pepper hair. At 55, he was still handsome, though the years had carved lines around his eyes and softened his jawline. When we'd first met, he used to look at me with such warmth and pride. Now, I caught something else in his eyes, guilt, concern, something he was trying to hide. "You're sure about that?" I pressed, watching his face carefully as I slipped the planner back into the drawer. "Because I can smell her perfume in here." He laughed, but it sounded forced, the same laugh he used at business dinners when trying to smooth over an awkward moment. Come on, Diane, you're being paranoid. Mom's probably still upset about us missing Sunday dinner, but she wouldn't just show up here. He toweled his hair, not meeting my eyes. Besides, she doesn't even have a key. Really? I folded my arms across my chest, feeling the crisp fabric of my new silk blouse, the one I'd bought to celebrate my promotion. Like she wouldn't just show up at my office last week to remind me about family obligations? Like she doesn't somehow manage to insert herself into every decision we make? Thomas's jaw tightened, a muscle working in his cheek. It was a look I'd seen more frequently in recent years, as my career had finally started taking off after years of putting it second to his architectural firm and our son's needs. She's just worried about us, about our future, he said, his voice taking on that placating tone that made me feel like I was being unreasonable. Maybe if you weren't so focused on work, don't, I cut him off, the word sharper than I intended. 27 years of biting my tongue, of rearranging my schedule for his mother's Sunday dinners, of postponing my own ambitions, suddenly crystallized into anger. Don't make this about my job again. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Susan, emergency wine night needed. Just closed a deal near you. Patio in 20? I looked at Thomas, still standing there, water creating a small puddle at his feet. The man I married 27 years ago would have been outraged at the idea of his mother going through our things. This version just looked tired, resigned, as if my anger was an inconvenience he'd rather not deal with. I'm going out, I said, grabbing my purse from where I'd dropped it on the chair. And when I get back, we need to talk about boundaries. Diane, wait. He reached for my arm, but I was already moving past him, the scent of lavender suddenly suffocating. And I changed the sheets, I called over my shoulder, pulling the door closed behind me. They smell like lavender. As I drove to meet Susan, my mind raced. The note wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of war. Virginia had always made it clear she thought I was wrong for her precious son, too ambitious, too independent, not the traditional wife she'd envisioned. For 27 years, I'd tried to accommodate her, to prove her wrong, sacrificing pieces of myself along the way. But now that our son was in college, now that I'd finally achieved the career milestone I'd been working toward, Virginia's disapproval had apparently turned to something more sinister. My phone buzzed again. This time it was James Morrison, my boss, outstanding work at the board meeting. Everyone was impressed. The Singapore team needs our VP there ASAP to handle the merger complications. Details tomorrow. Congratulations again, Diane. I smiled despite everything. After years of watching younger colleagues pass me by while I juggled Thomas's career needs and our son's activities, the vice president position was finally mine. But as I pulled into Susan's driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to face an impossible choice, my hard-won career or my 27-year marriage. Susan was waiting on her patio, 2 glasses of red already poured, the fire pit casting a warm glow against the gathering twilight. One look at my face and she said, "Oh honey, what did the witch do now?" I pulled out the note and handed it to her, sinking into the cushioned chair across from my friend of 30 years, the one person who had witnessed every sacrifice and compromise I'd made. Declared war, I replied, accepting the wine gratefully. And I think my husband might be on her side. 3 days after finding the note, I walked into my office to find James waiting for me, holding a stack of merger documents. The expression on his face made my stomach drop, a feeling I'd become all too familiar with lately. At 64, James had been my mentor for over 2 decades, the one who'd seen potential in me when others had passed me over. Now his usually warm eyes were troubled. "Someone's been talking to our competitors," he said, dropping the papers on my desk. The thud seemed to echo in my chest. Details about the Singapore merger leaked. The board's furious. I sank into my chair, smoothing my skirt beneath me, a habit from years of making myself smaller, less noticeable. But I wasn't that woman anymore. My mind raced through the possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. How bad is it? I asked, keeping my voice calm despite the anxiety churning inside me. James ran a hand through his silver hair. Bad enough that we need to move faster. I want you to fly out tomorrow, meet with the Singapore team in person. 2 weeks minimum. He softened his tone, knowing what he was asking. I know it's sudden, Diane. But you're the only one I trust to handle this. 2 weeks away. In my old life, before the promotion, I would have immediately worried about who would cook Thomas's meals, who would handle the household bills, who would keep Virginia at bay. The muscle memory of those concerns flickered briefly, then faded as I realized I no longer needed to put everyone else first. My phone buzzed. Thomas. I glanced at the screen and then set it face down. Whatever he needed could wait. After 27 years of being available at a moment's notice, I'd earned the right to finish a conversation uninterrupted. I'll make it happen, I told James, meeting his eyes with new determination. The timing couldn't have been worse, but maybe some distance would help clear my head. When I got home that evening, I found Thomas in the kitchen with Virginia. They were sitting at the island counter, heads bent together over what looked like brochures. They fell silent as soon as I walked in, like teenagers caught plotting something forbidden. The scent of beef stew, Thomas's favorite that Virginia always made, filled the air, a domestic scene I'd walked into countless times before. But tonight it felt like I was interrupting, an outsider in my own home. Diane darling, Virginia's smile never reached her eyes, which remained as calculating as ever beneath her perfectly styled silver hair. At 76, she still managed to look elegant and imposing, her posture straight, her movements deliberate. I was just telling Thomas about this lovely couple's retreat. Perfect timing with your work being so demanding lately. I set my briefcase down harder than necessary, the sound cutting through the false pleasantries. My gaze drifted to the brochures, glossy images of a mountain resort, and then to Thomas, who wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Actually, I'm flying to Singapore tomorrow, I said, the words coming out clipped and final. Merger complications. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Thomas's face darkened, his shoulders tensing in a way I'd seen too many times when forced to choose between his mother and me. Tomorrow? Were you planning to tell me? His voice held an accusation that made me want to laugh bitterly. After finding another woman's perfume in our bedroom, he was questioning my communication? I just found out myself, I replied, moving to the refrigerator and pouring myself a glass of water, needing something to do with my hands. It's 2 weeks, maybe 3. Virginia clicked her tongue, a sound that had grated on my nerves for nearly 3 decades. Oh dear, that's unfortunate timing. She patted Thomas's hand in a gesture that seemed to say, see how she puts her career first? Then she turned to me with a smile that didn't quite mask her triumph. Thomas just agreed to let me stay here while my condo gets renovated. But don't worry, I'll take good care of him while you're gone. My head snapped up, the glass nearly slipping from my hand. Condo? The one you just spent a fortune renovating last year? I turned to Thomas, disbelief coursing through me. Your mother is moving in? It's temporary, Thomas mumbled, fiddling with the corner of a brochure. Just until the mold issue is resolved. Mold, Virginia said smoothly, adjusting the pearl necklace that had been her signature accessory since her husband died 12 years ago. Such a terrible problem in these old buildings. I looked at Thomas, who suddenly seemed very interested in the granite countertop. And when were you planning to tell me about this arrangement? My voice was steady, but inside I felt a familiar resignation settling in, the feeling that my needs would always come last in this family. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, the way he always did when caught between his mother's expectations and my feelings. With you being so busy. He trailed off, avoiding my eyes, the implicit criticism hanging in the air. I need to pack, I said finally, not trusting myself to say more. I turned and headed upstairs, my hands shaking as I pulled out my suitcase from the closet we'd shared for 27 years. I laid it open on the bed where we'd slept side by side through the birth of our son, through Thomas's father's death, through countless small betrayals I'd chosen to overlook. A few minutes later, I heard Thomas's footsteps behind me. I kept folding clothes, not trusting myself to look at him. "You're being unfair," he said, his voice taking on that wounded tone that had once made me second-guess myself. "Not anymore. She's my mother. She needs help." I continued methodically placing items in my suitcase, the routine calming me slightly. Like she needed help last Christmas and the summer before that? I finally looked up, meeting his gaze. "There's always some crisis, Thomas, always some reason she needs to insert herself into our lives. She's lonely since Dad died. It's been 12 years. I spun around, the blouse I was folding clutched in my hands. "And what about that note she left? Are we just not going to talk about that?" "What note?" The genuine confusion in his voice stopped me cold. I pulled out the paper from my dresser drawer and handed it to him. His face changed as he read it, brows furrowing in confusion. This isn't Mom's handwriting," he said slowly. I snatched it back, studying it more carefully under the bedside lamp. He was right. The cursive was similar, but not identical. The V at the end had a flourish Virginia's signature lacked. Then my phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number, enjoying the chaos? There's more where that came from. I turned the screen so Thomas could see it. His face paled as he read over my shoulder. "Someone's playing games," he said, his voice uncertain now. "We should call the police." But something clicked in my mind, the leaked merger documents, the fake note, the sudden appearance of Virginia. It was too perfect, too coordinated. "I need to make a call," I said, already dialing Susan's number. "And Thomas, while I'm gone, maybe you should ask your mother about Linda Watson." His face went blank for a moment, then recognition dawned, followed by confusion. Linda Watson, the woman who'd been CFO at my company before me, who'd mysteriously resigned after a series of personal scandals 12 years ago, the same position I now held. "What does Mom have to do with Linda Watson?" he asked, his voice suddenly wary. I zipped up my suitcase, the sound final and decisive. "Ask her. And maybe while you're at it, ask her why she's been having lunch with our biggest competitor's CEO." As I wheeled my suitcase past him, I caught a glimpse of Virginia watching from the hallway, her face unreadable in the shadows. But this time I noticed something I'd missed before, the faint scent of her perfume, exactly like the one in our bedroom days ago. The game was bigger than I thought, and I was done playing defense. Singapore hotel room. Singapore was supposed to be my escape, but Virginia's shadow followed me halfway across the world. After 3 days of intense meetings, I was reviewing merger documents in my hotel room, my reading glasses perched on my nose, when Susan's urgent video call came through. Her face filled my laptop screen, her expression grim in a way I'd rarely seen in 30 years of friendship. "You need to check your joint accounts," she said without preamble, her normally cheerful voice tight with worry. "Now." My stomach clenched as I reached for my tablet, the weight of foreboding heavy in my chest. I'd been so consumed with saving the merger that I hadn't even thought to check our finances. As a financial professional, the irony wasn't lost on me. My hands shook slightly as I pulled up our banking app, entering the password I'd used for decades. The numbers didn't make sense at first. Where there should have been the comfortable cushion we'd built over 27 years of marriage, our retirement fund, our son's remaining college expenses, the renovation money, there were dozens of recent transfers I didn't recognize. Large ones. "How did you know?" I asked, my throat tight, a cold numbness spreading through me as I checked the dates. Each transfer aligned perfectly with my business trips over the past 6 months, times when I was too busy to notice our accounts being drained. Susan's face softened with sympathy. Because I just showed $1 million property to your mother-in-law yesterday. She's buying it cash, Diane. She paused, letting the information sink in. She said it's going to be a surprise for Thomas. The room started spinning. I set the tablet down carefully, as if it might shatter. After decades of managing our finances, of careful planning and saving, of postponing my own dreams to ensure our financial security, this felt like the ultimate betrayal. Does she have legal access to these accounts? Susan asked, her experience with her own painful divorce evident in her practical question. No, I started to say, but then remembered the power of attorney form I'd signed years ago, when Thomas and I had updated our wills after his father died. It was meant for emergencies, if one of us became incapacitated. At least, she shouldn't. My phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. Should have paid more attention to the home front. The taunt made my blood boil. I'd spent 27 years paying attention to the home front while Thomas built his architectural firm and Virginia planned our social calendar. I'd been the one balancing the checkbook, planning for retirement, making sure our son had a college fund. And now, just when I'd finally started focusing on my own career, they were systematically dismantling everything I'd built. I called Thomas 3 times, straight to voicemail. Finally, I texted, "Where's the money?" His response came hours later, after I'd paced the hotel room until my feet hurt, after I'd pulled up every financial statement I could access. "Mom's helping us invest in our future. Come home and we can talk about it." I laughed until I felt sick, the sound echoing hollowly in the empty hotel room. Our future, right. A future where once again, Virginia controlled everything, where my voice didn't matter, where 27 years of partnership meant nothing. The next morning, I headed to the Singapore office early, needing to lose myself in work, the one area of my life where I still had control. The early morning humidity wrapped around me like a blanket as I walked from my hotel, my silk blouse already sticking to my back. When I arrived, the office was still quiet, most employees not due for another hour. I settled at my temporary desk, the unfamiliar chair uncomfortable after 3 days, and opened my laptop to find an email from Linda Watson waiting in my inbox. The subject line made my heart race. History repeats itself. I saw your name in the merger documents, the message read. History repeats itself. Call me if you want to know how this ends. I stared at her number for a long time before dialing, my finger hovering over the green call button. Linda Watson had been a rising star at our company 12 years ago, the first female CFO. Her abrupt resignation amid rumors of impropriety had been the scandal of the year. I'd been mid-level management then, watching from the sidelines as her reputation was systematically destroyed. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting. "Let me guess," she said, her voice older than I remembered but still sharp. "Virginia's moved in?" A chill ran down my spine. "How did you? Because that's how it started with me too," she interrupted. The concerned mother-in-law, worried about her son's workaholic wife. Then the financial help. Then the rumors. My blood ran cold. I thought of the note, the text messages, the leaked documents. What rumors? Check your company email, Linda's voice was grim. The anonymous tips about insider trading should be arriving any minute now. As if on cue, my phone lit up with a message from James, my office. Now. We need to discuss some allegations. I thanked Linda and promised to call back, then sat for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. After decades of meticulous work, of integrity in every transaction, of building a spotless reputation, I was about to be accused of something I hadn't done. I straightened my blouse, touched up my lipstick, and walked to James's office with my head high. I'd faced Virginia's disapproval for 27 years. I could face this too. Hours later, after defending myself to the board, after providing every email and document they requested, after watching James's initial doubt turn to concern as the pattern became clear, I returned to my hotel room exhausted. My career wasn't over, but it was hanging by a thread. The board wanted more evidence, more proof that I wasn't involved in the leaks. I kicked off my heels and collapsed onto the bed, too tired even to cry. My laptop chimed with an incoming email from our family lawyer. The subject line was innocuous: updated estate planning documents. But buried in the attachments was a document with Virginia's signature, a power of attorney form dated 3 months ago, with Thomas's signature giving her control of our joint assets. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that it left me numb. 27 years of marriage, and he'd given his mother control of our life savings without even discussing it with me. I called Susan again, needing to hear a friendly voice. "I need you to do something for me," I said, my voice steady despite everything. I could hear the change in my own tone, a clarity and determination that had been dormant for too long. "Find out everything you can about Virginia's finances from when her husband died. Something's not adding up." "Already on it," she replied, the sound of typing in the background. "And Diane, there's something else you should know." She paused, and I knew whatever came next would be another blow. "I drove by your house today. There's a for sale sign in the yard." I ended the call and stared out the hotel window at the Singapore skyline, lights twinkling like stars against the night sky. The life I'd built was being dismantled piece by piece, without my consent, without my knowledge. In a matter of days, I'd lost my financial security, my home, and possibly my career. I opened my laptop and made 3 decisions that would change everything. First, I transferred every penny from my personal accounts, my inheritance from my parents, my separate savings, to a new bank, one Virginia couldn't touch. Second, I booked a flight home, not to recriminate, but to fight. Third, I began typing an email to James and our company's legal team, detailing everything I'd learned from Linda Watson about Virginia's previous schemes. My phone buzzed one last time that night, a photo from the unknown number. Virginia and Thomas at dinner with the CEO of our biggest competitor. The caption read, "Checkmate." But they'd made one crucial mistake. In the background of the photo, partially visible on their table, was a document I recognized immediately: our confidential merger papers. I forwarded the photo to James with one line: "Found our leak." Then I started typing an email to our company's legal team. The subject line read, "Evidence of corporate espionage and financial fraud." Virginia wanted to play chess? Fine. But she'd forgotten something important about me, something I'd almost forgotten myself during 27 years of compromise. I'd been captain of the chess club in college. And in chess, the queen is the most powerful piece on the board. As I packed my bags for the flight home, I found the original note that had started all this, still tucked in my jacket pocket. "Some wives deserve what's coming to them." I smiled for the first time in days, the weight of indecision lifting from my shoulders. Yes, we do, just not in the way Virginia imagined. Back in America, the corporate espionage investigation moved fast. By the time my flight landed back in the States, James had already called an emergency board meeting. What I didn't expect was to find Thomas waiting at the airport, leaning against a column in the arrivals area, hands shoved in the pockets of his expensive suit, the charcoal one I'd bought him for our 25th anniversary. He'd aged in the 2 weeks I'd been gone. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper, his shoulders slightly stooped. For a moment, I remembered the young architect I'd fallen in love with, the man who'd sketched our dream house on a napkin during our 3rd date. The memory ached like an old injury that flares up in cold weather. "You're making a huge mistake," he said, falling into step beside me as I wheeled my suitcase toward the exit. "No hello, no how was your trip? Just accusation. By coming home to find my house for sale?" I kept walking, the click of my heels on the terminal floor matching my heartbeat. "Or by discovering my bank accounts emptied?" "Mom was trying to protect us," he insisted, his voice low but intense, grabbing my arm to slow me down. I stopped and looked at his hand until he released me. By stealing our money? By selling company secrets? I searched his face for any sign of the man I'd married, the one who'd promised to be my partner, my equal. She was protecting our future. His voice rose, drawing glances from passing travelers. He lowered it again, leaning closer. The merger would have meant relocating to New York. She found out before you could blindside me with it. I stopped dead in my tracks, realization washing over me like ice water. The New York position, my dream job, the one James had hinted at for months, it had been confidential. Only the board knew about the East Coast division plans. How long? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. How long have you been helping her spy on my company? His silence was answer enough, his eyes shifting away from mine, the way they always did when he couldn't bring himself to tell the truth. My phone buzzed. James, board meeting in 30. Bring everything you have. And Diane, the New York position is still yours if you want it. At the office, security stopped Thomas at the lobby. I watched through the glass doors as he argued with them, gesturing toward me, his face flushed with anger or embarrassment, I couldn't tell which anymore. He looked lost suddenly, standing there in his expensive suit, the one I'd bought him, surrounded by the corporate world he'd always dismissed as less creative, less important than his architectural visions. The boardroom was packed when I arrived. James stood at the head of the table, looking grim but determined. Mrs. Howard is already here, he said as I entered. For a moment, I thought he meant me. Then I saw Virginia sitting calmly among the board members, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment and a triumphant smile that made my stomach turn. I hope you don't mind, she said sweetly, her voice carrying the southern charm she'd cultivated over decades in social circles. I brought some documents of my own to share. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts of emails, my emails, discussing confidential merger details, with dates that matched perfectly with the information leaks. These were found on my daughter-in-law's personal laptop, Virginia announced to the room, her pearl necklace gleaming under the fluorescent lights as she sat straighter. Along with evidence of substantial private trading activity. The room went quiet. I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized the extent of her plan. She hadn't just been gathering information, she'd been planting evidence, setting me up for a fall just as she'd done to Linda Watson 12 years ago. That's impossible, I started, but James raised his hand, his expression unreadable. There's more, he said, and for a terrible moment I thought he believed her. Mrs. Howard has also brought to our attention some concerning wire transfers to offshore accounts, he finished, looking directly at me. Virginia's smile widened, the perfect picture of reluctant duty. I hate to say it, but when I discovered what Diane was doing, I felt morally obligated to come forward. She touched her pearls, a gesture I'd seen her use countless times when playing the concerned mother. Family loyalty only goes so far. I almost laughed at the irony. Instead, I pulled out my phone and played the recording I'd made in Singapore. Linda Watson's voice first, describing how Virginia had set her up years ago, followed by Virginia's voice discussing the merger details with our competitor. The timestamp was clear, 2 days before any of those emails were supposedly sent from my laptop. Interesting timing, I said, watching her smile fade as the recording continued. Especially since these conversations happened before any of those emails were supposedly sent from my laptop. I laid out my own evidence methodically, the way I'd prepared financial reports for 27 years, timestamps proving the emails were backdated, bank records showing the real destination of the missing money, a shell company registered in Virginia's maiden name, and finally, Linda Watson's sworn statement about Virginia's previous corporate sabotage. You're not the only one who knows how to gather evidence, I told her, watching as the board members exchanged glances. The difference is, mine is real. The board erupted in chaos as security entered to escort Virginia out. She stood slowly, her dignity intact even as her plan collapsed around her. "You'll regret this," she hissed as she passed me, her lavender perfume briefly overwhelming in its intensity. "Thomas will never choose you over family." I met her gaze steadily, years of intimidation finally falling away. "That's where you're wrong," I replied quietly. "You stopped being his only family the day we married. You just couldn't accept that." Later that night, back in my hotel, I couldn't face the house I no longer recognized as mine. James called to formally offer me the New York position. "The board was impressed by how you handled this," he said, his voice warm with the pride of a mentor. "We need someone like you heading up the East Coast division. Someone who can weather a storm." I looked out my hotel window at the city I'd called home for 3 decades, the skyline Thomas had helped shape with his architectural designs. I could see his latest project in the distance, the curved glass tower that had kept him working late for months while I'd eaten dinner alone. The irony wasn't lost on me. In the parking lot below, Thomas's car was still waiting. He'd been there for hours, sitting behind the wheel, occasionally checking his phone. 5 years ago, I would have gone down to talk to him. 2 years ago, I might have called. Now, I simply watched, feeling a strange detachment, as if observing a scene from someone else's life. My phone buzzed one last time. "Another unknown number, you won this round. But ask yourself, what else are you willing to lose?" I deleted the message without a second thought and picked up my office phone. "James, I'll take the job," I said, my decision crystallizing with unexpected clarity. I thought of all the times I'd compromised, all the career opportunities I'd passed up for family harmony, all the small betrayals I'd forgiven in the name of marriage. "Sometimes protecting yourself means being willing to lose everything," I said, more to myself than to James. I learned that lesson the hard way. Now it was time to teach it to someone else. Family ambush. I should have known something was wrong when Susan called to warn me about the cars parked outside our house. "It looks like a family reunion," she said, her voice tense with concern. "And not the fun kind with potato salad and embarrassing stories. There are at least 5 cars I don't recognize, plus Virginia's Lexus." I pulled into our driveway slowly, noting the unfamiliar vehicles lining the street. The colonial-style home where I'd raised my son, planted gardens, and built a life suddenly felt like hostile territory. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering strength, remembering the confident vice president who had just faced down a boardroom full of executives. I could handle whatever waited inside. I found Thomas's entire family waiting in the living room, aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen since our 25th anniversary party 2 years ago. They were arranged like a tableau, some standing awkwardly by the fireplace, others perched on the edges of sofas and chairs. And there, holding court in my favorite armchair, the blue wingback I'd reupholstered myself during a rare weekend off, sat Virginia. "Diane, darling," she said, rising to greet me with the poise of a woman half her age. Her voice carried the practiced concern of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of making criticism sound like care. "We've all been so worried." The room felt like a trap closing in. I noticed family photos had been strategically placed around the room, old ones, from before my promotion, before our son left for college, happy moments carefully curated to tell a story about what our family used to be, before I changed, as Virginia loved to say. Thomas stood by the fireplace, his posture stiff, his expression a mixture of guilt and determination. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "What is this?" I asked, not moving from the doorway, keeping my tone measured despite the anger and betrayal bubbling just beneath the surface. His Aunt Sarah spoke first, a woman who'd always been kind to me at family gatherings. Now her face was pinched with disapproval. "We're here because we love you both. But this situation, the accusations against Virginia, the New York position, the divorce papers you requested, divorce papers?" My voice cut through the room. Virginia produced a manila envelope from beside her chair, holding it delicately as if it might explode. My head snapped toward Thomas. I hadn't requested any divorce papers. I found them in your email drafts, he said quietly, finally looking at me. His eyes were red-rimmed, whether from lack of sleep or tears, I couldn't tell. Were you even going to tell me? Or just serve me when you moved to New York? The draft email. I remembered writing it in Singapore during my darkest moment, after seeing the bank accounts emptied, after learning about the power of attorney. I'd composed it in anger, saved it to think about later, then never sent it. Someone had accessed my personal account. Again. Show them the email, I said, my voice steady despite the violation I felt. Show them the actual draft date. Show them that I never sent it. Virginia's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. The details aren't important, she interjected smoothly. What matters is healing this family. Family? I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. Like how you tried to frame me for corporate espionage. Or how you drained our accounts. Or how you're selling our house without my knowledge. Diane, Thomas warned, the same tone he'd used when I argued with his mother at countless Sunday dinners over the years. I was done being careful. Done being the reasonable one. Done shrinking myself to maintain harmony. Tell them, Virginia, I said, stepping fully into the room now, addressing the assembled family members who were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Tell them about Linda Watson, about the competitor meetings, about how my son comes home to an empty house while his wife chases promotions. She interrupted, her voice carrying the weight of years of subtle criticism. Don't you dare show them your phone, she continued, her eyes flashing with a calculation I'd never seen so nakedly displayed. Show them the texts from James at all hours, the late-night meetings, the trips. The room grew thick with whispers. I saw the judgment in their eyes, the story already written in their minds, the ambitious wife who abandoned her family duties, the devoted son left behind, the selfless mother trying to save her child's marriage. Thomas needs stability, his uncle declared, the same man who'd congratulated me on my promotion at the anniversary party. A real family. And what about what I need? I asked, but my voice was drowned out by a chorus of concerned relatives, all talking over each other about family values and priorities and choices. That's when I saw it, the moving boxes stacked in the hallway, already packed and labeled. I moved closer, reading the labels in Thomas's familiar handwriting. Thomas's clothes. Kitchen photos. Living room books. When were you planning to tell me about these? I demanded, turning back to Thomas, who at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. Mom found us a place, he said, his voice taking on that placating tone I'd heard so often. Just until things settle down, until you decide what's really important. The room spun. 27 years of marriage reduced to cardboard boxes and ultimatums. Every sacrifice I'd made, every career opportunity I'd passed up for family harmony, every dream I'd deferred, all of it meant nothing in the face of Virginia's determination to control her son's life. My phone buzzed. James again, need your decision on New York by tomorrow. Team's waiting. I looked around the room at these people who claimed to love me while systematically dismantling my life, at my husband who'd rather believe his mother's lies than face the truth about her manipulations. You want me to choose? I said finally, my voice clear and strong in the suddenly quiet room. Fine. I choose me. I walked to our bedroom, where we'd shared countless intimate moments, where we'd comforted each other through losses and celebrated victories, where Thomas had once looked at me like I was the center of his universe, and grabbed my emergency bag, the one I'd packed after Singapore. When I returned to the living room, the family had fallen silent, watching me with expressions ranging from pity to disapproval. Diane, wait. Thomas called as I headed for the door. The desperation in his voice almost made me pause. Almost. We can work this out. I turned back one last time, looking at the man I'd loved for nearly 3 decades, and at the woman who had orchestrated this elaborate intervention. "You know what's funny?" I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "I actually thought I was the one waging a war. But this elaborate ambush, this is what real manipulation looks like. Congratulations, Virginia. You've taught me more about revenge than I ever wanted to learn." "Sometimes love means making hard choices," she replied, but I caught the flash of uncertainty in her eyes. For the first time in 27 years, I'd surprised her. "No," I said, my hand on the doorknob. "Love means not forcing someone to choose." As I drove away, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Running away proves everything I said about you." I smiled and typed back, "Not running. Just getting reinforcements." The war wasn't over. It was just moving to a different battlefield, and this time, I'd be ready. New York apartment. 3 weeks into my new life in New York, I came home to find my apartment door unlocked. The new security system I'd installed should have alerted me to any entry, but my phone showed no notifications. I hesitated in the hallway, keys clutched in my hand like a weapon, wondering if I should call building security. Then I caught it, the faint scent of lavender drifting from under the door. Inside, Virginia sat at my kitchen counter, flipping through a stack of papers I recognized immediately, my private investigator's reports on her past. Her silver hair was immaculately styled as always, her navy dress pressed and proper, her pearls gleaming under my kitchen lights. She looked completely at ease, as if this were her apartment, not mine. "Fascinating reading," she said, not looking up as I set down my briefcase. She turned a page, her manicured finger tracing a line of text. "Though I'm surprised you missed the most interesting part." I kept my distance, phone ready to call security. The woman who had systematically tried to destroy my career and marriage was now sitting in my sanctuary, my new beginning, violating my space just as she'd violated my trust. "How did you get in?" I asked, keeping my voice level, refusing to show the anger and fear churning inside me. Virginia looked up, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Ethan's name is still on the lease application as your emergency contact." Amazing what a concerned mother-in-law story can accomplish with the right building manager. She tapped her finger against the document in front of her. "So many details you've overlooked, Diane. That's always been your problem." My stomach dropped. I'd been so careful with everything else, changing banks, changing my phone number, setting up security systems, but I'd forgotten that one detail from when I'd hurriedly rented the apartment. "Where is he?" I asked, glancing toward the bedroom, half expecting Thomas to emerge. "Downstairs, probably still arguing with the doorman." She waved her hand dismissively. "He doesn't know I made a copy of the key." Finally, she looked up fully, her eyes calculating. "You've been busy, digging into my finances, talking to Linda Watson, even tracking down my late husband's old business partners." "You should leave," I said, not moving from my position near the door. After everything she'd done, after all the damage she'd caused, she still had the audacity to invade my home, to act as if I were the one in the wrong. But we're just getting to the good part. She pulled out a particular document, holding it up like a trump card. "See, while you were investigating me, I was investigating you. Did you know your father didn't actually abandon your family when you were 12? The room tilted slightly. My father had walked out one summer morning, leaving my mother with 3 children and a mountain of debt. The pain of his abandonment had shaped my entire life, made me determined to be financially independent, to never rely on anyone else for security." "What are you talking about?" "He tried to contact you multiple times." Virginia's smile was all predator now, enjoying the shock on my face. "But your mother?" She paused, letting the moment stretch. "Well, let's just say she had her own ideas about family loyalty." "You're lying," I said, but the certainty in my voice wavered. Virginia was manipulative, but she was also strategic. She wouldn't make a claim she couldn't back up. She slid an envelope across the counter. "Open it," she commanded, the authority of a woman used to being obeyed evident in her tone. Inside were letters, dozens of them, in my father's handwriting I barely remembered but instantly recognized. All returned unopened, many marked refused in my mother's distinctive script. The first was dated just months after he left, explaining everything, begging to see me and my siblings. There were birthday cards, graduation congratulations, even a letter from just last year. My mother would never. I started, but the evidence was irrefutable. My mother, who had painted my father as a monster who abandoned his family without a backward glance, had been intercepting his attempts to stay connected for 40 years. "You'd be surprised what people will do when they think they're protecting their children from pain," Virginia said softly, watching me process the revelation. "Your mother thought she was shielding you from a man who would only hurt you again. Just like I've tried to protect Thomas from your ambition." She stood, smoothing her dress. "You're not so different from her, you know? So convinced you know what's best, so ready to burn everything down in the name of independence." The apartment door opened before I could respond. Thomas walked in, stopped short when he saw me. He looked thinner than when I'd last seen him 3 weeks ago, the suit I'd bought him hanging slightly loose on his frame. His eyes were tired, the lines around them deeper than I remembered. "You look thin," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of all the words we hadn't said to each other. I couldn't answer. The letters in my hands felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds, each one representing a connection I might have had, a relationship stolen from me by someone who claimed to love me. "I'll give you two a moment," Virginia said, gathering her things with deliberate slowness. At the door, she paused, her final barb perfectly timed. "Oh, and Diane, the board meeting tomorrow? Don't bother going. James's retirement was announced this morning. His replacement already has someone else in mind for your position." The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Thomas and me alone in the silence. We stood like strangers, a chasm of betrayal between us. The man I'd shared a bed with for 27 years, the father of my child, now seemed like someone I'd never really known. "Did you know?" I finally asked, holding up the letters. "About my father's letters?" "Mom told me last week." He looked exhausted, the fight drained out of him. "She also told me about the private investigator, the interviews with Dad's old business partners." His voice hardened slightly. "Were you ever going to tell me you were building a case against my mother? Were you ever going to tell me you helped her access my work emails?" I countered, the hurt and betrayal bubbling up again. "Were you ever going to tell me you gave her power of attorney?" He flinched. "I was trying to protect you. The New York position, it would have killed us." He gestured around the apartment, at the life I was building without him. "Look what it's already done." "No, Thomas," I said, setting the letters down on the counter. "Your mother killed us. And you helped her bury the body." My phone buzzed. "Susan, turn on the news. Now." I picked up the remote and flipped to the financial news channel. The headlines scrolled across my TV screen. "Market manipulation investigation opens at major trading firm." Multiple executives named. My name was on the list, alongside James's and several board members. "Mom said this might happen," Thomas said softly, his voice carrying a resignation that suggested he'd known about this too. "That's why I came to warn you." I stared at the letters from my father, at the news headlines, at my husband's familiar stranger's face. Everything I'd built, everything I believed in, was crumbling around me. The New York position, the fresh start I'd hoped for, all of it in jeopardy because of Virginia's machinations. "Get out," I whispered, not trusting myself to say more. When he didn't move immediately, I repeated it louder. "Thomas, get out." After he left, I sat in my dark apartment, surrounded by the ruins of my carefully constructed life. The letters from my father scattered across the counter, each one a reminder that the story I'd built my identity around was a lie. The news continued to play in the background, my professional reputation being dismantled in real time. My phone buzzed one last time, an unknown number, now you understand. Some things are thicker than water. Some betrayals run in the family. She was right about one thing. This was about family. Just not in the way she thought. The Howard Family Foundation Gala, the annual Howard Family Foundation Gala, wasn't my idea. It was Susan's. It's perfect, she'd said 2 weeks after Thomas's visit, her eyes gleaming with the strategic brilliance that had made her a top real estate agent. We were sitting on her patio again, the same place where this whole saga had begun. Virginia's pet project, all her social circles in one place. And I have something she doesn't expect. That something was currently sitting in my purse, a USB drive containing 30 years of financial records that had taken weeks to compile, records that showed exactly where her late husband's fortune had really gone. Not to charity, as Virginia had always claimed, but to a series of offshore accounts, meticulously hidden and systematically drained. The ballroom of the Grand Hotel glittered with crystal chandeliers and designer gowns. I smoothed the silk of my own dress, midnight blue, a color Virginia had always insisted washed me out, and scanned the crowd. After decades of attending these events as Thomas's wife, standing quietly by his side while Virginia commanded the room, it felt strange to be here alone, a woman with her own mission. I spotted her near the stage, resplendent in designer black, her silver hair arranged in an elegant updo that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She was playing the grieving mother to a sympathetic audience, accepting condolences for her son's failed marriage as if I had died rather than divorced her son. Thomas stood beside her, looking uncomfortable in his tuxedo, nodding mechanically as people offered their sympathies. "Ready?" Susan asked, appearing at my elbow in a vibrant red dress that turned heads. After 30 years of friendship, she still knew exactly when I needed support. I took a steadying breath, feeling the weight of the USB drive in my clutch. Almost. I checked my phone one last time. The email from my father was still there, we'd finally connected, 40 years too late. Some people mistake control for love, he'd written after I'd finally reached out. Don't let them win. Virginia saw me coming through the crowd. Her smile flickered just slightly, the only sign that my presence had disrupted her carefully orchestrated evening. "Diane darling," she said as I approached, her voice carrying just enough for the people nearby to hear. "How brave of you to show up, given everything." "I wouldn't miss it," I said, matching her tone perfectly. "Especially since I'm making the keynote speech." The smile vanished completely. "I believe there's been a mistake. The board selected me," I finished, enjoying the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Unanimous vote, actually." Something about wanting to hear from the woman who uncovered the biggest financial scandal in the foundation's history. The color drained from her face, making her expertly applied blush stand out in stark contrast. Thomas stepped forward, his eyes moving between his mother and me. "What are you talking about?" I glanced at my watch, nearly time. "Show them," I called out to the tech booth at the back of the room. The presentation screen behind the stage lit up with financial statements, transfer records, and one particularly damning email chain. You see, I addressed the now silent room, the public speaking skills I'd honed through decades of presentations coming naturally. While everyone was focused on the supposed market manipulation at my company, they missed the real story. The systematic draining of the foundation's accounts over the past 12 years, all traced back to one person. Virginia's hand shook as she reached for her wine glass, the charms on her bracelet, including the lavender-scented locket she always wore, jingling with the movement. "You have no proof." "Actually, I do," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Your husband kept records of everything, Virginia. including your plans to frame him for embezzlement before his convenient heart attack. The glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The sound echoed through the silent ballroom, a perfect punctuation to the moment. "Mom?" Thomas's voice cracked, the single word carrying decades of trust and disappointment. "Is this true?" "Of course not," she snapped, her composure finally cracking. "She's trying to destroy our family, just like she destroyed Linda Watson. Can't you see that?" I pulled out my phone, hit play. Virginia's voice, 12 years younger but unmistakable, filled the room. "Either resign quietly, or everyone learns about your son's real father." The crowd erupted in whispers. Thomas staggered back like he'd been hit, the color draining from his face. 7 years, I said quietly, stepping closer to him. 7 years of manipulation, lies, and theft, all while playing the grieving widow. "You don't understand," Virginia hissed, her carefully cultivated Southern charm evaporating completely. "Everything I did was for family." "No." Thomas's voice cut through the chaos, stronger than I'd heard it in years. He turned to his mother, decades of manipulation finally clear in his eyes. "Everything you did was for control." Security was already moving through the crowd, but before they reached her, Virginia straightened her spine, looked me dead in the eye. The calculating woman I'd feared for 27 years emerged fully, no longer hidden behind the facade of the concerned mother-in-law. "You think you've won?" She laughed bitterly. "That this makes you better than me?" She gestured around at the stunned crowd, at Thomas's shell-shocked expression. "Look around, dear. You're standing alone. No husband, no family. Just like your mother after your father left." "You're wrong." I nodded to the back of the room, where James stood with the FBI agents we'd contacted weeks ago. "I'm not alone. I just chose my family more carefully than you did." As they led her away, Thomas caught my arm. The familiar touch sent a jolt through me, memories of 27 years flooding back, his hand on mine at our wedding, holding it through our son's birth, gripping it at his father's funeral. "I should have seen it," he said, his voice breaking. "Should have believed you." "Yes," I said, the word carrying the weight of all our lost years. "You should have." "Can we?" He gestured vaguely, a man reaching for something already gone. "No." I gently removed his hand, the gold band I'd worn for nearly 3 decades no longer on my finger. "Some things can't be fixed, Thomas. But they can be learned from." My phone buzzed one last time, an unknown number. But this time, I deleted it without reading. Some messages didn't need a response. Outside, the city lights sparkled like justice finally served. Susan was waiting with a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. "To family," she said, pouring. I smiled, thinking of my father's email, of the conversation we'd had after all these years, of the daughter I would visit next weekend, Thomas's half-sister, the family secret Virginia had used to control him all these years. I thought of my son, who was flying in tomorrow, eager to hear my side of the story after months of Virginia's version. "To choosing our own," I replied, raising my glass to the night sky. Epilogue. 6 months later, 6 months after the gala, I found myself back in our old neighborhood, helping Susan stage a house for sale. It wasn't just any house, it was Virginia's. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "You're literally cleaning up her mess," Susan said, arranging fresh flowers in the foyer. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. Talk about coming full circle. The place felt smaller than I remembered. Boxes of evidence lined the halls, waiting for the FBI's final sweep. In the living room, family photos still hung crooked on the walls, perfect facades hiding perfect lies. I straightened one absently, recognizing the Christmas dinner where Virginia had first suggested Thomas give her power of attorney just in case. My phone buzzed. A text from my father, "Lunch next week?" bringing those old fishing photos you asked about. We were taking small steps, building something new from the ruins of what was lost. It wasn't perfect, 40 years couldn't be recovered in 6 months, but it was real. No pretense, no manipulation. Just two people getting to know each other again. The doorbell rang. Thomas stood on the porch, looking more like himself than he had in years. He'd lost the haunted look that had shadowed him since Virginia's arrest, and he'd started his own smaller architectural firm, focusing on sustainable community projects, the work he'd always wanted to do before his mother pushed him toward more prestigious commercial developments. "I thought I'd find you here," he said, hands in his pockets, the spring breeze ruffling his hair. He glanced around at the perfectly staged living room. "Feels strange, doesn't it? All these years, and I never saw what was right in front of me." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The house was like Virginia herself, impressive at first glance, empty at its core. "Mom asked to see you," he said suddenly. The words hung in the air between us. I hadn't visited Virginia in prison, hadn't responded to her letters. But something in Thomas's voice made me pause. "She's dying," he said quietly. "Cancer. She's known for months, even before everything." The universe had a twisted sense of humor. At the prison, Virginia looked small in her gray uniform, her perfectly coiffed hair now stringy and white. The glamorous socialite was gone, leaving behind a frail woman who seemed to have aged 20 years in 6 months. When she saw me, she didn't smile. "I suppose you think this is justice," she said, her voice weaker but still carrying that edge of defiance. "I didn't come for justice," I replied, settling into the metal chair across from her. "No?" She laughed weakly, the sound hollow in the sterile visiting room. "Then why are you here?" "To understand. After everything Virginia had taken from me, trust, security, years of my life, the only thing I still wanted was comprehension. Not for forgiveness, but for closure." She was quiet for a long moment, studying me with eyes that had lost none of their sharpness despite her illness. "When Thomas's father died, I thought I'd lost everything: power, status, control. It all slipped away." Her fingers played with the edge of her sleeve. "Then I saw you, building your career, taking my son further from me. I couldn't lose again. So you destroyed everything." It wasn't a question. I protected what was mine. She coughed, a painful sound that seemed to rack her entire body. "Or thought I was. Funny how fear makes us mistake possession for love. I thought of my father's words in that email: some people mistake control for love. I thought of my mother, intercepting his letters all those years, convinced she was protecting us from further pain." "Are you happy?" Virginia asked suddenly, the question catching me off guard. "In your new life?" I considered the question, thinking of my apartment in New York, the job that challenged me, the rekindled relationship with my father, the weekly video calls with my son, the friendship with Susan that had sustained me through everything. "I'm free," I replied. "It's not the same thing, but it's better." She nodded slowly, something like respect flickering in her eyes. "I never told anyone this, but I was like you once, ambitious, independent. Then." She gestured vaguely, encompassing the years, the choices, the slow erosion of the woman she might have been. "Life changed me into this." I stood to leave, the conversation having given me what I came for, but she caught my hand. Her skin felt paper thin, blue veins visible beneath the surface. "The night I left that first note," she whispered, her voice suddenly urgent, "I was going to confess everything. About the foundation, about Thomas's father, about his real parentage. I was so tired of the lies. But then I saw how easy it would be to blame you instead." "Why tell me this now?" "Because you won the game I didn't even know I was playing." She released my hand, seeming to sink further into her chair. "Don't become me, Diane. Don't let victory turn into vindication." Outside, Thomas waited by his car. "You okay?" Are you? I countered, genuinely curious. Finding out your whole life was built on your mother's lies couldn't be easy to process. He shrugged, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache slightly. Getting there. The foundation's recovering. I'm in therapy. He smiled slightly. Dating someone new. Good, I said, meaning it. And, she missed you, you know, he added hesitantly. Mom. She kept every article about your successes, even in prison. I think she admired you, in her way. I thought about fear, about control, about the thin line between love and possession, about how revenge can consume you if you let it. Back at Virginia's house, Susan was finishing up, adding the final touches that would make the place appealing to buyers despite its notorious history. Ready to close this chapter? She asked, sensing my mood. I looked around one last time. The empty rooms held no more power over me, no more secrets, no more fear. They were just spaces where people had lived, loved, and lied. Actually, I said, an idea forming as I looked at the grand living room where Virginia had held court for so many years. I think I'll buy it. Susan stared at me. You're joking. Not to live in, I explained, a plan taking shape in my mind. To turn into a women's business center. Something good should come from all this. Later that night, standing on my New York balcony, I got one final text from an unknown number. You were always stronger than me. Use it wisely. I didn't delete this one. Some messages deserve to be remembered, not for the pain they caused, but for the wisdom they eventually taught. The city lights sparkled below, full of possibilities. The lavender plant I'd started growing on my balcony, reclaiming the scent that had once meant betrayal, released its fragrance into the night air. I'd learned that family isn't just about blood or marriage. It's about choice. And sometimes, the hardest choice is choosing yourself.